This poem is called Colorado Springs. She's crying for all of us, her brother, son, me, everyone, someone's boy. Before the wedding, Henny wrecked, loved whelmed, meaning well, so much, she says. Black boys go through these days, you know, gay, transgender, gang banging. I know what she means. I try to not be criminalized. I know she doesn't see us as crimes, maybe sins, but sense to her. Since I know my own mother, I know she means the bodies we didn't think our sons would lay down, the men we never imagined would seek our sons in the night, our boys dressed in those colors monochrome and prism strained, flagging what we hoped wouldn't find them. I know when I pressed my purple stone to my mother's breast, what flooded her wasn't disgust, but sickness. Knowing what violences might rush her once blue babe, now cut to pink meat, red as honesty, those blood-ill premonitions. Love, their own bodies, other boys. All mothers know anything can hunt a son, a fear so animal language cannot tame nor reason. Later, before the wedding, in the woods at the mountain's feet, my lover points out a mushroom that looks like a coin. It do. Earthy currency, a metal, soft and chewable, fragile platinum. Even if I was Mother Earth, I couldn't expect this wild change, fleshy and star-bright steel bloom. I wouldn't know it grew like this too, dirt rising into armor. She didn't know we grow up fine. My mother loves her purpled child deeper and truer, even though what she feared would scar me left its mark. I know she meant well. I know love shoots beyond language or sense. Mothers, if we make it through it all. Love, find our sons. Body, hold our babies well. Free them from all cages, even if it's what we named them. Violence, don't lust after our boys and call it kin. If you must find our babies in the midst of their lives, leave a wound we can dress. And may we not be the scars they stitch, lonely in the mother gone dark. I believe that poems are gathering spaces across time, right? I love thinking about, let's say, a poem by Gwendolyn Brooks. And when I'm reading that poem for the first time, I'm sort of in the room with Gwendolyn and also, or with Miss Brooks, sorry. And also in the room with everybody who's read this poem across time. And now I'm being affected by it in the same way. So I think maybe that's tied to my upbringing, right? Thinking about just how Black Americans operate, whether it be the church or the pool hall, the Legion, whatever it might be, all these gathering spaces, right? For me, it was the church. It was my grandparents' front porch. So all these spaces that everybody could come as they were, right? And come with whatever feeling it is. If I think about the church in particular, which I think was the place I first learned about transformation, when I think about those preachers who were maybe some of the performers that I was most intimately studied under at that time, they made those services a place for all of us to gather, but also with whatever feeling we have, right? So, of course, there was sorrow and grief in the space, but there was also great love, great ecstasy, great joy. And I think for me, poetry is its strongest when there are those two different poles or at least whatever those two poles are, but just two places, maybe even two horses trying to rip the body apart. And the poem is the body that won't break. So, in Colorado Springs, there is great sorrow, but there's also great hope. There's also immense tenderness and love. There is this seeking for understanding, trying not to be offended, right? But trying to dive deeper into a mother's logic, which, when spoken, could be complicated, right? This mother who's saying, oh my God, it's so sad that, our sons are, they could be gay, they could be transgender, and they could also join a gang. And, how those things are so dissimilar. But what does it mean? How do I have empathy for somebody else's logic? How do I walk into her seeing and try to see what she's feeling, which is a mother's sorrow. And a mother's sorrow is so informed by care and love, anxiety, and great hope. So I think, yes, poems are places for us to gather. And because of just, how art is, right? I can't control what somebody reads into a poem. So maybe I'm trying to offer up a diversity of feelings or tones in a poem, so that way everybody who enters it can get what they need from it, if they need that poem that day. The two things that are pulling at my heart right now, I'll speak a little reflectively. So I think with my most recent collection, the two poles, or the two horses pulling me apart, were hope and hopelessness. I was really trying to balance hope, which for me just boils down to a belief in the future, a belief that in tomorrow there is something worth seeing, and hopelessness being, for me, maybe another word for realism. For the sobering experience of looking at the world and witnessing it truly for what it is. I think I've been long disillusioned by the idea of the American dream, right? By American heroism, right? This idea that we are this great savior of the world is completely false. We are the world's police. We are the world's sanctioner and executioner half the time. Sure, there is good maybe happening in the midst of some of our projects, but there's also a lot of grief and a lot of pain that our American comfort generates for the rest of the world. And I wanted to hold those two things. How can I be real about the world that I'm seeing, both on a micro, intimate level and on a macro, national, global level? And how can that realism not negate hope, but inform it and make it more mature, more sound, more real? I think there is such a thing as false hope or stupid hope. I love stupid hope sometimes. Sometimes you need stupid hope. But I think stupid hope wasn't something that I was finding useful in the aftermaths of the George Floyd uprisings, in the aftermaths of everything, right? The aftermath of life. So I needed to hold despair's hand so I could have an honest talk with hope. And that was where I was. I think currently in my work, which is work that nobody's seen yet because it just lives between me and my computer right now, or me and my notebooks, I am really fascinated by time. So maybe the two poles that are pulling me are the past and the future. I think that starts to come up in Bluff. There's a couple of poems that were especially written towards the end of me building the manuscript that definitely time is a major character, and sometimes a hero and sometimes a villain, or just this thing that we have to negotiate, right? Time is character, time is location maybe. And so I've been writing a lot of my new writing, maybe all of it, I should say. There is this great appreciation, fascination, and also fear of time. And so I really think that's where I'm at right now, is maybe I'm a Doctor Who, trying to figure out, flashing back and forward in time and figuring out how does our future maybe, or what we desire in the future, how does that make us edit our past, even in our minds and our hearts? What do we hold on to the past as we're marching towards the future? And how has our past, dictated the paths that we're gonna go, right? I'm also kind of thinking about like multiple realities and stuff like that. If we are standing forever at the furthest point in the road, how do we bend that journey further towards good instead of further towards apocalypse, which it feels like sometimes we're headed towards very quickly. For me, hopelessness, like every emotion, is a useful thing to investigate, right? I can turn it over in a poem or in my life, but a lot of my life happens in poems. And I can see its usefulness, right? Sure, despair, for me, I don't think despair is a place I can live. If I'm thinking about it either as object or location. A life that is navigated by despair is a life that quickly ends. And so when I do feel that despair, that hopelessness, I want to get as much useful information out of it as possible. Why was I hopeless? What did it tell me that I cared about? What was I mourning? What evacuated hope from me? And how, so that is useful information, right? Hope. I always say like mourning means you care, right? Nervousness means you care. And also hopelessness means that there was once hope. And so how can I track where hope left? So I do think that hopelessness is this useful thing to turn around in a poem and really understand the conditions for hope, for life, for the future. I also think poems are mighty things. I think maybe and also I think they're mighty enough for me to be able to question poetry's use of a poem. But I told my mom a couple years ago, I think this was part of her journey as my reader, because she couldn't read my books at first without seeing them as like diary entries, right? If I was sad and depressed in a poem, she took it as if I was sad and depressed and suicidal right then and there. And I had to tell her, maybe at one point that feeling was very true. Certainly at the impetus of the poem, maybe, right? That feeling is very present, but at a certain point you have to edit it. It has to become artful in a way. And so, but I love there's an ephemeral nature to humanity, right? Sort of this briefness, right? All of us will die, right? So there is this, I think I'm using that word right. So there is this ephemera to our life, but poems are forever. As long as humans exist, poems are forever. So a feeling can just be true enough for the poem. And I can disagree with myself in the next poem because I was in a different moment, because it was a different present at the time when I was writing it. And so if I can give hopelessness its space within this one poem, then I can allow it to maybe reach its full potential of hopelessness. But I know that somewhere else I can juxtapose that by going deep into the depths of hope as well. So I think every emotion is useful and something that you can hold just for long enough for the poem to be true, right? I always tell my students that it just has to be true for the poem. It doesn't have to be true for the rest of your life. But in the poem, let it sit solid. Yeah. I think I've changed as a teacher, really, honestly, just because of structure. I'm blessed to teach at Randolph College in the States, which is a low residency program. Our students, we live all over the country as students and faculty. We have 2 residencies a year for 9 days each, and the rest of the time we're just meeting online one-on-one. And I think so much has been learned for me in that one-on-one mentorship. The current workshop model in the United States, and I think, abroad as well, is, everybody, we show up with our poem every week and everybody gives each other feedback, and oh my God, you start to hate people doing that week after week. But getting to just have these one-on-one relationships with my students. Sure, there are things that carry over, there are themes, there are tools and tactics that I might give to everybody, but I really am able to realize that we are all our own poet on our own journeys. And sometimes there's great potential in community. I love community, of course, but for art making, Sometimes it's better to have this intimate one-on-one relationship. So that way I'm not teaching a bunch of people about poetry, but I'm helping this one person see deeper into their own work. And that type of specificity has changed myself as a teacher and writer as well, because I can't write everybody's poems. I can only write mine, you know? And it's my work to not try to write in the fashion of everyone else, but to write into my own particularities and my own uniqueness, and to encourage uniqueness across the board, right? Because that's how we build this beautiful tapestry that is a literary community, that is a canon, right? That, you know, Gwendolyn Brooks could never do what June Jordan does. June Jordan could never do what Audre Lorde does. Audre Lorde could never do what Araceli Girmay or Tracy K. Smith does. But oh, together, don't they sing so well? So, you know, helping my students find their unique note also helps me sound out mine as well. When I think back on my poetry journey, since my first book coming out 10 years ago, 10 years, oh my God, I'm old. I think coming from Poetry Slam, my work originally, Poetry Slam, you know, I think people like to talk about it like it's this formless thing, that it's just people getting up and yelling. But there's definitely a form there, you know, same as a sonnet or a sestina or a villanelle, right? You have to be shorter than 3 minutes, but you shouldn't be too short, unless you didn't use your time wisely, right? You have to elicit an emotion from the audience in a particular way, whether that be hope, grief, sorrow, whatever. It needs to be entertaining. It needs to be moving. And so it does make it's a great way to strengthen your muscles as a poet and as a writer. But it's only particular muscles, right? Poetry Slam is sometimes unforgiving to quietness. Sometimes it is not welcoming to discomfort. And I think, particularly with this new work, I think I am a quieter poet. I think there are moments that don't call for so much noise and action. Sometimes they definitely do as well. And I'll go there when I need to, but there were things I needed to say with a steady voice and a steady hand, and not with so much explosion. I needed meditation. And also, I think it's not a comfortable book to read, right? I think even in previous collections, maybe if even I was dealing with discomfort, I think there was always a invisible mission just behind me that wanted to make sure that the reader was comfortable and cared for. And I think I've done away with that mission. I think there's great power in discomfort. I think we must uncomfort ourselves to grow, right? I mean, you know, same as going to the gym, no pain, no gain, right? And so I'm allowing for more pain and more discomfort in the work, and hopefully my readers gain something from that discomfort. I know I have. There is absolutely, I think, an expectation or a stereotype, maybe, of a particular kind of anger that you're gonna get from a Black poet, a Black male-bodied poet in particular, that I think there is a fetishization of our anger and of our pain sometimes. But I don't think, I think some poets respond to that by going completely away from it. But I think anger is such a useful emotion. And if I look at the United States, if I look at the conditions of Black people in the United States and across the world, how could I not be angry? If I look at the oppressive systems that are done in my name and in my tax dollars, how could I not be angry? So there was this negotiation that I had to have, firstly because I did not become a poet to be famous, right? I still don't think I'm poetry famous, which is like this famous. And, you know, there's this thing where, like, for me, poems have real hopes and dreams and ambitions and ways that they want to change the world. I'm grateful that a lot of people get to experience, you know, those hopes and dreams of mine by reading the poems, but I never wanted a career. You know, I'm grateful that I get to have a career, right? That I get to do something that I love and that I think is important, and that also helps fund my life. But I think I was not good personally at separating the two, right? Or at least I started to feel guilty because I was becoming successful, right? It's this sort of, so maybe it's similar to survivor's guilt, or just this careerist thing. I didn't come into it to be thanked. I came into this work to change. And so, yeah, I think I have a better sense of how to dismiss some of those voices now, because also when I listen to those voices that were making me feel guilty, they don't actually feel like me. They feel like they're put on. And when I look deep into my heart of hearts, I don't have to go that far, actually, to recognize that my ambitions are still pure. It could be very easy to be satisfied with acclaim, right? And I could maybe write towards that, right? I think there are poets and artists who figure out a lane that their audience really enjoys and starts to cater to that instead of going fully into their own, curiosities and expressions. And even if there's a good goal, even if you're making your audience feel something wonderful, I think there can also be, I want to be careful with my words here, because I do think all art is about manipulating the people of others, but when I say manipulation, I do mean in a negative. I don't always mean in a negative way. In this sentence, I do. I think you can start to manipulate your audience and actually deny them the full spectrum of their feelings, right? That you're just the feel-good poet, right? And that's great, but are you doing your audience a disservice by just making them so happy every time you come to them, right? Even children's shows, that are definitely bent towards happiness, allow their children to experience complex feelings. Shout out to the show Bluey, which I think is fantastic. And, allows children via this wonderful, bright show to still feel a great expanse of emotions, to understand sadness and disappointment and all these other things, right? So, yeah, I think I think if I start to bend too much towards what gets a reaction out of people and then what can feed my ego, then I think I start to become dishonest with both myself and my audience. And so that's just a lesson that I think I had to learn over these years. I think and I do think audience is an incredible question to deal with as a writer, right? Do you write for yourself? When do you sort of start to realize that you're handing it over to other people? But I never, I think there could be a way where I start to just look at audience as just like a bucket of money to pour poems into and pull money out. But I really want our relationship between writer and audience to be one of genuine respect and of genuine curie and quarrel. So that way, when I'm asking a question, when I'm wrestling with something, I'm genuinely inviting my audience to deal with that. And I think my favorite writers have done that, right? I think when I read James Baldwin, especially his essays, I feel like I am thinking alongside him. I feel like I'm invited into the vulnerability of his mind. And I think that's what I want my audience to feel, is that I'm inviting them into the vulnerability of my curiosity, and that there is a connection that I am seeking, and that there is a call and response, right? That I always say I hope my poems are useful, and I hope they're useful, and I hope that if they're useful for other people, that I get to feel the effect of that by seeing how my work and the work of others has transformed the world. I do think art changes the world, slowly but surely. Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure that I'm a good soldier towards that mission, to make sure that I'm not stagnant, that my audience is not stagnant, and that we're all charging forward with braver, more dangerous, and more revolutionary questions as we go forward. I am not of the camp of poetry does nothing. I hate that quote absolutely so much. Who said it? One of those guys. I hate it so much. If poetry does nothing, nobody should do it. None of us should do anything that does nothing. The only thing that does nothing that's worthwhile is relaxing. We all need to relax. But for me, poetry is not relaxing. I'm very much in the school of Audre Lorde. Poetry is not a luxury, right? There are real demands that the genre puts on us. There is real effect when a poem truly moves something. You know, I can't say poetry does nothing because I know poems have saved my life, that poems have brought me new epiphanies, that there are ways that poems have so fundamentally transformed my life, my thinking. I think about reading the work of D.A. Powell and Essex Hemphill when I got my HIV diagnosis. Oh my God, those poems saved me. They kept me company. I think about reading the work of June Jordan, of Somaj Sharif, of Amiri Baraka, of so many poets who, of all the poets of the Black Arts Movement, the last poets, Sonia Sanchez, so many poets who I saw writing poems that had real teeth for liberation, and had real weapons to raise against empires. So you can't tell me poems do nothing. When I get on stage and I'm talking about trying to rescue poems, what I mean is I am even trying to rescue those poems myself from being pure entertainment. And I do think poems can be entertainment, right? I think it was Gwendolyn Brooks who said late in her career that, after a turning point in her career, that she wanted her poems to educate, liberate, and entertain her people. I believe those were the three she said. And I believe in those three. But I didn't want the first two, the education and the liberation, to be confused for entertainment. I think that was a effect of some of the more recent, in the last 10, 12 years, sort of the digitizing of poetry, especially like via YouTube. And sort of, folks, there's a lot of us that sort of gained a particular kind of celebrity within the genre. Because these poems are very real, but then they have 10,000 views, 10 million views on them or something like that. And now it feels, maybe you can start to perform, right, for the views, and try to elicit this, right? Poetry slam, as much as I love it, right? Like, there is also like this bent of like, oh, let me write the saddest, most angry, most political poem I can think of. To what? Try to win the slam? Like, what's the currency there, The currency is very cheap and it's very brief and it's dust, there's nothing after a while. Nobody remembers who won the 2011 National Poetry Slam. I mean, the people who won probably do, but that doesn't affect the world. But a poem's real heart and concerns and motives and lessons and voltas, that can change the world. That can change a person. And so I, for myself, have had to ratify the mission of the poems and not let it become something cheap as media. If I just wanted to make content, I'd dance on TikTok. But I'm spending so many hours, and days and so much weary and jubilation on these poems. There has to be a greater currency than entertainment attached to it. And surely sometimes, yes, I can want to entertain. And even in liberation and education, yes, I want to be a good writer. Yes, I feel excited when I figure out the language for something, when I get it just right, when I surprise myself. Oh, I'm such a nerd for that when it comes to language. But entertainment has to be just as intentional, but also separate for me than liberation and education. And I think for a while, I was allowing those to rub up against each other too much. And I think maybe even in this book and the aftermath of it, I just want to always remind my audiences as well, when I'm performing in front of them, that we're here for something greater than snaps, claps, and entertainment. When I talk about liberation and transformation in poems, I'm thinking both on the micro level of the individual poem, what are the instructions for living that we're giving in the poem? And I think, all poems are, for me, these little tiny bursts of humanness, even when they're about animals or the nature or about aliens, whatever you want. a human wrote that. And so there are these little encapsulations of humanness. And so, I think when I think about the poem as a portal or as a transformative object, for me, I think the best poems, and I think every poem should be trying to be the best poem, but obviously they're not. The best poems redirect you. You come out of them a different person. I can think about reading for the first time, Won't You Celebrate With Me by Lucille Clifton. Oh, if I didn't appreciate my life so much more after reading that poem. I think about poems by the great poet Amir Suleiman, who when I hear a poem like his, We Must Win, I believe it. I believe that justice is something that we absolutely must continue our fight for, and something that we will achieve when I hear those words fall out of his mouth. So I think they are truly transformational. I think poetry as a whole, surely, can change people. Big P poetry, the genre. I think we go to it to be, maybe if not even transformed, to be confirmed, right? To like help us get a feeling out. If a poem does allow us to grieve, right? I think that is a transformation from being stuck in your grief to maybe being able to feel and let it flow a little bit more. I can think of individual poems of mine and just people's experience of them is how I know I'm doing the work. I've had so many folks come up to me and tell me about reading or hearing Dear White America or Dinosaurs in the Hood or Not an Elegy, and so many poems that they say, transformed their thinking on race, that woke them up from a sleep where they, couldn't see the real need for change for the conditions of Black people, all people of color, for all oppressed people all over the world. My lens typically centers in on Black and queer folks. So I know because people have told me that there is great power in change. I know because I have experienced the transformation in a poem. I think about, Danez Smith, low-key hates America, whatever. But I think about the founding fathers of America, George Washington and all them. And they were all literate men, right? And they were forming a country, maybe via colonialism and genocide, definitely. But they were forming a country that they had first seen in their minds and in their hearts, and that they knew was possible because of what they had read. And the philosophers and the thinkers and the poetry and the plays that they had read made them know, the imagination lets you know that something is possible, right? The imagination is how we can call the intangible into tangibility. Thank God for inventors, thank God for makers, right? So for when I say liberation, I'm not saying a poem is gonna change the world, but I'm saying a poem might spark something in someone. That's what I mean by usefulness, right? The poem might not save your life, might not change the world, but if the poem can be but a little catalyst that gets somebody to think about what their own action is, to think about what their own contribution to liberation, to transformation is going to be, then that's great enough for me. I don't think I'm the architect, but I would love to be on the architect's reading list. So that's for me the possibility in poetry is how can you influence someone to walk and do and think a little differently. I don't think poems are free from being media, from the strictures of capitalism. I think Bluff is a very transformative book. It also will cost you $17.99 to buy. What is the line in the poem? There is no poem free from money's ruin, right? Even if it's as simple as like I put a barcode on the book and I sell it. So we're not free from that. We're not antithetical to that, right? But how can you play within that space, right? I think there's revolutionary TV. I think there's revolutionary radio. Radio is maybe the freest thing, but then you got to buy a radio. But there's transformational art of every genre. And because we live in a world that is dominated by capitalism, and needs for money, there's no art besides graffiti, besides free public art, or even those. We have to enter everywhere. I don't think you can make any art besides dance, song, the things you make with the body, right? Those are like the freest forms of art. Everything else, once you get paint involved, once you get paper involved, once you get a stage involved, once you get lights and a camera involved, we're dealing in capitalism. We're dealing in money, at least. And so there's no freedom from that. The question is, how will you interrupt that? I think I became a poet when I was 14 years old. I had written little things like that. I can remember in middle school when I was like 12 or 13 having this little notebook that I covered in tape. And I wrote on the front of it, I think it was called Danez's Words and Thoughts. And I would write little poems in there, and I would write little raps about all the cars and women I didn't have at the time. And I think I had weird stuff in there. I had like a theory. I remember one page was like my theory about how time worked. And it was just all these diagrams that my little 12-year-old brain was like, I think this is how the universe works. Maybe I was onto something. But it wasn't until I was 14 and I was taking a class, a theater class in high school taught by Jan Mandel, who in my city is a legend and has helped create a lot of artists and activists and thinkers in Minnesota and across the world. And she teaches from the practices of Auguste Boal in the Theater of the Oppressed. And so we were forced, and I was just this little energetic. I've always loved theater. I used to act and stuff like that. And I've always been this little hyper, theater kid, just wants to go in and roll around and do all the improv and stuff like that. But here was this woman who was asking us what we thought and what we wanted to say, and that it could be funny. I always wanted to make people laugh, but that it could be serious. And I didn't think about myself as somebody who was capable of saying serious things in the world at 14 years old. But here she was encouraging it. And so we were writing these monologues for our plays. And I'll never forget, I think it was Paul Flores, a great California poet, and I forget who was with him. Maybe it was Rafael Casal, who later became a mentor. But definitely Paul Flores came to our school one day and did a poetry performance. And I remember sitting there with my classmates and looking back and forth, and he's up there doing poems. And we said, I think we write those, because for us, what we knew of poetry before then was, it was dead and gone. It was Walt Whitman. It was Emily Dickinson. It was Langston Hughes if it was Black History Month. But we didn't know any living poets, until they started coming into our classrooms, and we realized that these things that we were calling monologues in our plays might just be something called poems. And I started being like, okay, maybe I'm a poet. And so I started writing poems a little bit. And I think it was like March 2004 when we asked Jan if we could do a open mic in the last hour of the day in the theater. And we just packed, everybody was sitting on the floor. People were coming from their classes. And we all got on stage and did poems. And I think it was getting on those stages and realizing that I had something I wanted to say, and that I wanted to say it in chorus and in concert with all these other people who were writing their own truths, and that I wanted to add mine to the record too. That's what made me a poet, was wanting to be with other poets and realizing that I just might have something that's worth listening to for somebody else, and that they might get something from it. I hope that folks who are at their beginning or, in the middle, wherever they are in their poetry journey, one thing I hope they ask themselves is, who needs your poems? I think poetry can be such a fiercely and wonderfully private act. But the second you choose to share it, be it publication, be it getting on a stage or at an open mic, I would love folks to just ask themselves who most needs this. Maybe it's yourself. Maybe you're getting up there for yourself, and that's great. But I do think there is great love and and possibility for love in sharing. And so sometimes when I get on stage, I like have to ask myself, okay, like, who am I going to picture in my mind's eye that just, needs poetry right now, that might need this line, that might need to hear this? And I find it very liberating to know that I'm not the only poet and that we're all out here and that we all need poetry and that we all want poetry, even if we don't know we want poetry. Like, there's a poem out there that everybody wants. And that community, that great gathering of the poets who I think are all gathered around language to try and figure out what a human is. I think that's a great community to be a part of. And so, it's also, when you think about who most needs your poem, you also, it builds your empathy, right? And it makes you realize that nothing in this world can ever truly live in a space of selfishness and privacy. We need other people. We need connection. And so, I think if you can meditate on that, you also realize that it is your duty to write poetry because there is somebody outside of yourself who needs it, who needs to hear what you thought because they didn't have the language to think it themselves. That is your duty, right? So even if at first it's for the self, it's private, it's personal, it's intimate, it is your task to make sure that somebody who doesn't have the same entry point into language as you requires your voice so that they can live a little brighter and stronger. This poem starts with an epigraph from the poet and my friend Marlon M. Jenkins from his poem Glint. I can't stop building monuments to the chaos. Craft. This is what my devils looked like. This is how I loved them. This is what almost killed me. So beautiful, I couldn't look away. Or so horrid, it scarred my sight. Had to find beauty if I had to keep it. What saved me? There's no poem. Too busy in love to write. Only when love was sleeping and I was restless could I attend to ecstasy's latest report, what was rapidly drying into memory, or the prayers almost called into my hand and marked the air with what I found between time and love. But the world is happening and demands its memorials to the bees and the trees and the water and the oil in the water in the sea and the oil poured across the land in the water in the land and the poison in the land in the air in the town and the countries they're building for cops and the crops and the fishes and the birds and the border and what happens at it and inside of it and the fact of it exporting its cruelties to either side and the murder and the rape and the prison and the money made from prisons and the children. They are dead. 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 And we keep on with Tuesday and the whole fucking thing. And I want to kill. Like, actually kill the people engineering this brutal today until there is a watered and peach-filled tomorrow. But whose bloody yesterday would I be if I don't plan to kill the children too? But I don't kill anyone when I should. I write and try to hide the world in a sonnet so no one will kill us. No one will kill us if we're locked inside a beautiful thing. But time rips us open. Time, the virus that turns children into these men, these women, these geniuses of a future where everything is dead. Time, not a mother. but a father driving us to the bridge where he'll abort us all these years after time gives a fuck about a poem. And that's all I have to lay at his feet, asking for anything besides all I have in a tomorrow where evil isn't so well funded and scaffolded. Writing these little letters, these little warnings to the future to run. I write, I try to assist witness until love, mine, shifts in the bed and snores a little louder, and I turn the poem to him. In the middle of hell, such water. This reminder, amen, how much I love. Ashe, how long I'll fight. Let me map you to Oasis. Let me show you where the weapons are.